Okay, so shoot. Okay, just for yeah, let's just restart and go at that again. So yeah, so for what we're talking about is whether or not the USSR was socialist. You obviously think it was. I obviously think it wasn't. I had given a quick premise, and you were then just kind of responding to that. So I'll just go over my premise, and you can repeat your argument there. So yeah, yeah, I don't think the USSR was socialist from a Marxist perspective, not any kind of like Trotskyist perspective or anything like that, just to clear that up. And in general, I think it's because it's difficult to really pin down one thing because there are many, many different aspects. But essentially, I would say it still had a capitalist mode of production, even though it was, still different to, say, liberal democracies. Not the mode of production itself, but the general society. And this is mainly because it had all the aspects of a capitalist mode of production, like commodity production, profit, value, capital, money, all of these lovely things. So yeah, that's my kind of like very general premise there. So why don't you respond to that?
Okay. As I was saying previously, commodity production under socialism is not the same as it is under capitalism. Capitalism, a commodity is produced, its exchange value and its use value, meaning it's to fulfill a need or a want. Plus, it has to turn a profit. And sometimes it's merely just to turn a profit, even if it isn't actually a real need. And frequently, real needs aren't covered because they don't turn a profit. This was not the case in the Soviet Union, as things were created specifically for their use value because they were wanted. Exchange value wasn't really a thing. Like, they weren't producing for exchange value, but they did need to have it in some certain cases. That's not the same thing as a capitalist economy. As I said, products in socialism are produced for use, not for exchange. They're not produced to make an exchange value. They're produced for use values according to a plan. So it's not really the market that's allocating where commodities go or resources go, because it's going to a plan, not where the market, the law of value would dictate that it's supposed to go. The thing is that a lot of people, particularly left comms, this is usually a left comm argument. I'm not claiming you're a left comm. I'm just saying this is commonly a left comm argument, is that the USSR sold products, which technically makes them commodities, and even so, they weren't produced according to the profit motive. So I would say that, considering that the law of value was not the determining factor which would make it capitalism, producing commodities under socialism doesn't make it capitalism.
Okay, so I mean, yeah, there's a lot to go over there, so I'll just kind of hopefully hit your main points, and if I miss anything, let me know. So first off, I'll say that, like, yeah, not all aspects of production in the USSR economy did turn into commodities, but we see the same thing happen in capitalist countries as well, actually. So for instance, in European social democracies, they have free healthcare and things like that, and welfare and all that stuff. So they have a lot of production that doesn't become the commodity form, but this doesn't mean that they're some kind of halfway in between socialism and, sorry, let me finish my argument. That doesn't mean there's the same logic doesn't apply there, that then there's some kind of halfway between socialism and capitalism, or socialism altogether. Secondly, you also say that, like, it wasn't always done with the profit motive, and like the law of value wasn't dominant and things like that. But I think that's just another way of saying there was no competition. And obviously, I'll concede that, because there were no markets, so there obviously was no competition. But I don't think that means then that it's really at the core of it that different, because you're still making profits. I mean, it's kind of like, if a co-op, for instance, when they don't lay off their workers when they could, in favor of automation, they're not running their business according to the law of value. But then this isn't socialism in any way, because they're still producing commodities for a profit, even if they're not getting the most profit they possibly could out of. It's like companies that don't engage in planned obsolescence because they want a higher build standard and things like that. And then lastly, I think really you can talk about all these kinds of, like, exceptions, like, oh, well, they produce commodities, but they did it in this particular way and things like that. But I think that's all kind of redundant when you realize that the very fact that commodities exist at all shows that there must be a distinction between private and social labor in society, because the reason that commodities the reason that goods take on the form of commodities and take on value to relate to society is because they need a way to pass from private into social labor, and they do so by taking on value. That's how they become social. That's why they become commodities. But under socialism, labor must be directly social from the outset. Therefore, goods no longer have to take on the form of value to relate to society because they're already managed by society. Essentially, this is another way of saying that, the means of production are commonly owned or communally owned. But this couldn't have been the case if there was commodity production, because commodity production necessitates the existence of private labor. So what would your response to that be?
Well, the first thing would be that the point about social democracies is a complete non sequitur. So what if there's some things that are designed specifically not for profit, like healthcare, et cetera? The engine of the economy is stuff that is sold for a profit. So like the comparison doesn't mean anything. And some people would actually argue that social democracy is a mix of socialism and the capitalism.
Would you argue that?
Which I wouldn't necessarily agree with.
Okay.
I mean, it's a complete non sequitur. It doesn't matter. Although the point is, a commodity is specifically produced for exchange, and that but specifically for exchange value to make a profit. Now, Marx doesn't necessarily stand against the existence of profit inside of socialism, because Marx didn't actually write very much about what socialism is. In fact, he wrote more about what communism is than socialism is. But even then, collecting profit from it from a state enterprise is not the same thing as collecting it from a private capitalist. The law of value doesn't reign because the law of value would determine where resources go because of where it's profitable. Whereas, to put it as Che Guevara put it, what is socially rational is not necessarily what is economically rational. It's not the same thing. It's not allocating resources according to profit, which is the point, which is why there's a socialist commodity production and capitalist commodity production, because it's not the same thing. And even the stuff about social labor isn't necessarily even relevant under socialism itself. That's really more communism. And even then, it doesn't even change what the point of commodity production under socialism is.
Okay, so first off, I would say that Marx did have a problem with the existence of profit in socialist societies, because profit is a consequence of surplus value, and the surplus value, well, if surplus value exists, then obviously, there's value. And I think Marx says quite specifically, almost in Critique of the Gopher program, one of the few places where he does talk about lower phase and higher phase communism, which, by the way, he never made a distinction between socialism and communism. So I'm just going
to... Yeah, socialism, communism are two different things.
Well, for Marx, they're not. Like, he never made that distinction. There's only lower phase communism, and there's...
That's not true.
Really? Where does he...
Mode of production, socialism is a transitory period between the two.
No, he never said that. No, because
do you want the quote?
I'd love a quote, yeah.
Okay. Between the capitalist and the communist society, there lies the period of revolutionary transformation of one into the other. Correspondingly, this is also a political transition period in which the state can be nothing more than the revolutionary dictatorship of the proletariat.
Yeah, so that's from part 3 or 4 of Critique of the Gopher. So that's that at no point does he use the term socialist there. So like I totally admit that there is a transitionary period between capitalism and lower phase communism, and that is the dictatorship of the proletariat. But that Marx never said that this phase was socialism. That's something that Lenin introduced himself, and personally, I don't consider.
Even if that were true, that it's something that Lenin invented, which I don't believe that it is true. It would be an irrelevant point.
Okay, well, I figured I'd bring it up because that's something you were saying, so I just wanted to say, from the Marxist perspective, that coming from that angle, I don't think it makes sense to use that term. But anyway,
it's the Marxist perspective.
Anyway, I'll just continue what I was saying there. So Critique of the Gopher. Well, actually, because obviously I would say that Marx did have did say that in lower phase communism, there is no value, and hence there's no profit and things like that, and there's communal ownership in the means of production and blah blah blah. But it seems to me that you're saying there's socialism, which is the dictatorship of the proletariat, and then there's lower phase communism, and that's what Marx was talking about. And then the USSR never got to this point. Is that what you're saying?
I would say that the Soviet Union did not reach communism. No, it did not.
Okay, because yeah, so I mean, again, that seems like a very weird way to interpret Marx, because again, he doesn't really say anything, allude to anything like things going like that. But I think Engels in Anti-Düring, I was reading this quite recently actually. He says that when the proletariat sees means of production for the dictatorship of the proletariat, this means of production ceases to act as capital, right? So, I think that's fair to say then that the actual even the transitionary period itself isn't really capitalism, but the USSR still had capital and it still had all these things.
Of course, it still had capital. That's not the same thing as...
Well, then it wasn't a dictatorship of the proletariat, according to Engels, at least.
Yeah, it was. Actually, Marx, I just gave the quote where the state was the revolutionary dictatorship of the proletariat as an instrument, the state as an instrument of class struggle. And even then, it really doesn't even matter because the capital was held by regular people. Again, this is almost...
It's the point that the point is that the capital exists at all, though. And again, I've just said Engels straight up says that it ceases to be capital. But you're saying, oh, it's okay because the capital is held by the people.
In however it is that you particularly define it, I think it's just mincing words.
Is it? It seems pretty direct. So
that's the point.
So Marx never cared if the point isn't whether or not it's private or public property. The point is if the means of production acts as capital. I can give you Marx quotes for that as well, where he straight up says, capital can perfectly function. Hold on, where capital can perfectly function with all of its contradictions without there being any individual capitalists. He straight up says this. And now, if you want to say that you disagree with Marx here, which from what I'm gathering, you seem to be deviating a bit on your definitions here, then that's fine. But I'm trying not to. I'm trying to come at it from the Marxist perspective. So really, if we're just going to have two different definitions of what it is, then there's no real argument to be had. But I would say that if you go by Marx's definitions, then
because it does not function the same way, and I think that's an interpretation.
Well, it doesn't matter how it functions.
And it's not entirely clear.
It matters that it exists at all.
It doesn't really, as capital does not function the same way in socialism as it does in capitalism.
Well, it doesn't exist in socialism. And again, Engels straight up says it doesn't exist in socialism.
And of what it is still capital, but it does not function the same way.
But again, I don't know how else to say this. Again, even if we take your definition of socialism, hold on, even if we take this definition of socialism to be the dictatorship of the proletariat, Engels straight up says, in the dictatorship of the proletariat, there is not capital. I could read the quote if you wanted.
I'm not denying the quote. I'm saying...
So why are you saying then that it matters that it functions differently? Because it still exists. That's clearly a contradiction there.
But I believe the definition they're using is the one of under capitalism. Considering that they...
Oh, you think there are two definitions of capital?
Don't have a socialist definition of capital.
So you've made up a socialist definition of capital?
It technically exists. You could still describe it by that word, but it's no longer the same thing.
So it seems to me then that you've come up with a new definition for...
No, it's not a new definition. It's not the same thing.
But you're saying they're using a different definition to you.
I could still refer to a truck as a car because it has the same basic definition. That doesn't make it the same thing. This is just definition mongering. The law of capital doesn't reign under socialism. So even if it is capital or not, is irrelevant.
It is relevant. And I think definitions, when you're trying to stick to a theory, are definitely relevant. Because if we start changing definitions, then the whole theory kind of falls apart.
Because it isn't the same thing. It wouldn't follow the same definition.
Well, it is. I don't. So I don't see where you're getting this idea that they changed the definition just because
it's the same thing.
Because it's capital. Okay, so what's the definition of capital for you? Because for me, it's, things that increase its own exchange values, money in flux, So I don't see how there's a different version of this. This is quite a fundamental thing.
What does it matter?
Sorry?
So when the system's not based on increasing exchange value, what's the point?
Well, then capital couldn't exist. Because if it's not increasing it, I mean, even look, what I seem to understand is that what happened under the USSR was that exchange values were increased because, of course, they were, because human labor was, you know, carried out on goods, and then these were sold, but the actual surplus value was then just, you know, put back into society, like free healthcare and things like that. But that doesn't, you know, that's all well and good. That's better than liberal democracy, but that doesn't mean then that capital still doesn't exist as something that's increasing its own exchange values. It's just changing where that increased exchange value, where that surplus value actually goes. And again, I'm not aware of at any point Marx or Engels saying, well, actually capital is okay if it's just handled in this very specific way. I think they outright say that it will no longer exist in any form.
Follow that definition that you gave.
It doesn't, well, if it doesn't follow that definition, then it's not Marx's definition. And then again, there's no point having this conversation because we're not working on the same definitions.
Capital.
I'm sorry?
Then I guess it isn't even capital in that case.
How is it not capital? And again, do we agree that this is Marx's definition?
I agree that that's a Marxist definition, but that's not necessarily what you're describing as being capital.
Okay, how?
But you said it was designed for the increasing the exchange value. But that's not the point. That's not the point of a socialist society. It's not the point.
But it still happens.
Of a planned economy. So what?
Well, then it still exists. Whether or not people are intentionally thinking it's the point or not, it's still happening.
Basically, what we're saying is that it exists in an entirely different form.
No, it doesn't, though.
But it's still the same word.
No, the only thing that's changing is that the surplus value goes to different places. Instead of being pocketed, it goes back into society, but it's still there.
Of capital, according to the law of value, do not operate in the same way. So basically, you're saying, well,
capital does operate in the same way.
So therefore,
again, so if like a co-op decides to put their surplus value back into their own company or something, is that socialism? Like, it's the same logic.
No, it isn't.
I know it's not. Like, it's the logic that you're using.
No, it isn't the logic I'm using. You're deliberately obfuscating this.
I mean, I don't really know what else to say because.
No, I don't know what else to say either.
Again, you just
kind of fits the definition of.
It definitely fits the definition. It outright fits the definition. It's just
even function in the same thing. It's probably not even the same thing to begin with. It's probably not even capital. Again, this is completely.
What do you mean probably not even capital?
By that definition, this probably isn't.
So you're saying that the USSR didn't have capital?
Again, this is definition mongering. If you're going to go by Marx's definition, then I would say probably not necessarily.
Why?
Because it doesn't function the same way under socialism as it does under capitalism.
But it does.
You can redefine anything to be capitalism.
But no, I could. It does though. Again, what I'm saying is that the definition of capital is things that increase its own exchange values, and under capitalism and under the USSR, it still increases its own exchange values. So I'm not seeing the difference.
One, the value goes into the pocket of the capitalist, and that's not necessarily the goal. It's not the law of value determining it to go into that direction. So I don't know why you're not seeing the difference.
I mean, that is a difference, but it's still capital doing the exact same thing.
There you go. You just said it. That's not.
I'm not. I already admitted previously that it wasn't pocketed by capitalists, but I'm saying that's a separate thing from how capital functions. You're just talking about how the profit is divvied up, but but the profit is still being generated.
Still the same thing.
It's not all capitalist societies work in the exact same way. I mean, would you say that Saudi Arabia works in the same way as like the US or, you know, European countries? But they're both capitalist countries. Your profits are still going to different ways, but they still work with capital. So fundamentally. So there are slight differences. Again, I won't deny this, but fundamentally, that word that you just used, fundamentally, it's still capital doing the exact same thing in all scenarios. Not vaguely, exactly fits.
It just vaguely fits that definition, even though it doesn't work the same way.
Okay, so the definition of capital...
Comparing Saudi Arabia to the United States.
The definition of capital is something that increases its own exchange values.
In your words, going to the state, going to a private capitalist is the same thing.
No, it's not. But they're both still capitalism.
That's not the determining factor.
I'm not saying all forms of capitalism are the exact same, but they are all still capitalism.
Picking a definition. This is a meaningless nitpick. Then what is socialism?
Okay, just calm down, yeah? So, like, I'm saying that the definition of capital is...
Then what would be socialism in that case?
Oh, what would be socialism? Sorry, I didn't hear. Well, socialism would be where capital and value as a concept didn't exist to begin with, because again, there's no longer this distinction between private and social labor. Labor is social from the outset. Therefore, goods... Hold on. Well, for me, so communism and socialism are the same thing, because for Marx they are.
Then you're done. Then you're already done. You've just said communism and socialism is the same thing. They are very clearly not.
Marx at no point ever makes a distinction between them, though.
Distinguish the difference between socialism and communism.
No, he made the distinction between lower phase and...
So you're just
he never...
that socialism and communism...
Okay, so if we're going to go back to that, then I'm just going to bring up again that Engels again says that there is no capital in the transitionary period.
Where does he say that?
Anti-Düring.
But even then, again, capital, you're arguing over the function and definition of capital. Pardon me, the definition of capital rather than its function.
No, because it still functions in the same way.
No, it doesn't function.
Because its definition is its function. Because it's such a social construct of how money works.
Capital would be determining where it goes, but where value is particularly going. That is not...
No, it doesn't. No. It doesn't determine where the value goes. It just determines that the value increases. That's the definition fundamentally.
So?
What do you mean so? That's the definition.
Socialism?
No, value doesn't exist under socialism.
No, that's not true. Sorry, that is not something that...
Well, I don't know what you expect me to say to that's not true.
That's nothing that has been practically applied in real life.
No, it's not, but socialism hasn't been applied in real life, so...
You're arguing something that may or may not even actually work. Give me an...
Well, are you saying socialism doesn't work? Ooh, that's spicy coming from you, I mean...
What does that mean?
Well, sorry, I figured you would have been on the pro-socialism side, but now you're suggesting it might not work.
I am on the pro-socialism side. You're arguing some utopian notion of it, or at least not necessarily.
Well, Marx was utopian.
But something that has no practical application. Whereas with the Soviet Union, we do see it practical.
Marxism isn't about practical applications. It's about analysis of society. It's about scientific analysis of society and making predictions of what will happen from there.
You went with a baseless, with something without any experience whatsoever.
I'm sorry?
So that's why you went with the example of saying of something that doesn't actually exist.
you know
that doesn't exist in the real world.
I know it doesn't exist in the real world, but okay, so when Marx was writing, there hadn't been any, even by your standards, there hadn't been any examples of socialism in the real world. So was he not allowed to say anything about socialism then?
No, but he was allowed to give a general guide.
That's what I'm going off of. It's a very general guide.
We are comparing a real life example, an experiment in socialism, as opposed to something that is not.
But I'm saying that these examples you're giving just weren't socialist to begin with, and I don't think it really makes a difference, because you have to see where... No, hold on. You have to see where...
Supposing it not to be, and then you're saying socialism and communism are the same thing.
I didn't presuppose it because I already gave arguments for that. But you have to see where... Hold on. You have to see where Marx actually gets his definitions of lower phase, higher phase communism, dictatorship of the proletariat from.
I don't argue that he's wrong.
But you seem to be almost arguing that he's utopian.
Even if it is just from Lenin, it's still correct.
Okay, but I really want to go back to this point of like practical solutions or something, because I find that really weird, because that's not what Marx ever intended to do. Give practical.
Never intended practical solutions.
No, not at all. He was a scientific theory, his law of value. And then socialism was just a natural, organic, spontaneous result of capitalist crisis. And the only reasons he ever talked as much about lower phase, higher phase, whatever, as much as he did, is because usually there was either one or two cases. In the first, it was because it was basically everything capitalism wasn't, essentially. And that's all we really had to base it off of. He was saying, well, this is what capitalism is, and then we're going to be going to a new mode of production. So really all we can say is that it's not this, and that's as far as you can get. Unless you want to go with the labor vouchers. And the only reason Marxism ever went as far as to talk about labor vouchers is because, again, he didn't think this is what we should do as a practical solution. He thought it's what people would do, what felt natural to them at the time, right? So this isn't about practical solutions. This is just saying what he predicts will happen scientifically. Practical solutions don't come into it, and as such, the fact that I'm talking about a definition of socialism which hasn't been realized in the real world just isn't a relevant point.
So really, that's it. This isn't going to my definition, or your definition of socialism. Therefore, it doesn't exist.
But it hasn't existed, no.
Therefore, it hasn't existed.
No.
Then I have no idea what this debate is supposed to be.
Well, it's to be debating that point.
Yeah, we basically went over like one or two arguments according to that, and you just said no, it's because capital.
Yeah. But again, it's because Marx and Engels, they say that, at all points, capital doesn't exist, but it did exist in the USSR.
It wouldn't even function the same way and doesn't even necessarily have the same.
It does function the same way, though. I don't know how simpler to put it, because you seem to be coming at it from like a distribution point, but I'm coming at it from a production point, and I think that's when you're talking about a mode of production, that's a bit more important.
Coming at it from a production point, it doesn't determine where things go.
No, it never does that, though. It never does that. Competition determines where it goes.
Allocation of resources, like what is to be invested in, etc.
Either the market determines where it goes, or planning determines where it goes. But in both instances, at least with the USSR, capital was still doing the same thing in both. Okay, just the resources were going to different places.
So if the market tells it where to go, or the state tells it where to go, it's therefore still capital and still the same thing.
I don't know about therefore, but it's therefore capital if it's capital if it's
by the market or by state plan, it's still capital.
If it's doing what capital does, which is increasing its exchange values, then yes, regardless of whether.
Again, this is a meaningless nitpick.
So it's not a nitpick though, because that's Marx's fundamental definition of capital.
Value. That's what commodity production does.
Exactly.
It takes something and adds more value to it.
Exactly. There you go, and that's why the USSR wasn't socialist.
So what? So I'm not supposed to have a shovel. I'm supposed to have a lump of steel. Of course, if you apply, of course, it increases in value.
What? Sorry, could you elaborate on that point, please?
In value, hence the labor theory of value, whether it's socialism or capitalism.
The labor theory of value only applies to capitalism, though.
Important point. You're arguing a point that doesn't mean anything. Of course it decreases in value. You've just applied labor to it. Even if you apply constant capital to it, you've increased.
So let's talk about where value comes from then. So value comes from when, as I've gone over this already, so value is objectified human labor power, right? So human labor power still goes into things and can give things use values. But if we're talking about exchange value is again objectified human labor power. And this only crystallizes in the form of exchange value when it makes the transition from private to social labor, right?
Keep in mind that value is determined by not just the commodity itself, but by the market, which the market now no longer exists.
Whoa. No, not at all. Right, so the exchange value itself is determined by abstract human labor power, but then the market will alter this exchange value and give a price, but the exchange value itself is still there, because if the exchange value has to remain as a constant for fluctuations in supply and demand to ever mean anything. So the market doesn't affect the exchange value, the market gives a price. Yeah.
So what's the meaning here? Of course it's going to have...
Sorry, you said that it alters the exchange value. Maybe I misunderstood you, or you misspoke. My bad.
I don't see even what the relevance is. Of course it has to have a relevance for a value for somebody else. But again, you're presupposing it to be built only. But one of the points of commodity production is that it is produced specifically for exchange value to make a profit on. It's not. It's produced according to a plan to fill a need. This is not the same thing as it is in capitalism.
But profits are still made. Those profits are just going into society for, beneficial things. But they're still there.
It's not made specifically for a profit.
Okay, so again, I've already gone through this. When a company decides not to go for the most profitable route, or again, when there's free healthcare, which doesn't even enter commodities at all.
Sequitur.
How though? Because I don't think it is.
Universal healthcare doesn't make a country socialist.
Exactly.
It's a mode of production.
Exactly. But your logic almost implies that it does.
Economy of the Soviet Union.
But it wasn't the entire economy though, was it? There was agriculture and introduction.
It was planned. I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, but
in the later years, you could say that it wasn't, because it wasn't under the revisionist era. That's absolutely true.
They did become commodities though, because again, they were exchanged. And even if they weren't exchanged with making the most amount of profit involved, they're still being exchanged for profit.
And they would no longer be considered socialist because of that. There's a difference between the revisionist and the non-revisionist era.
No, I'm talking about the non-revisionist era there.
Okay, so you're saying that essentially the market was there through the whole thing.
No, not at all. But prices were there throughout the whole thing. You know, calculated by the central planning or fixed by the central planning, and they represent value. And when those things are sold, that represents profits, and those profits were go into society, and that's all still there. And then all of these things necessitate things existing like capital, like a distinction between private and social labor. There are all these fundamental aspects of the capitalist mode of production that to call it distinct from the capitalist mode of production makes no sense, because it has all the same features.
It is distinct because they don't function in the same way.
It's just a social democracy on steroids.
No, it's not a social democracy on steroids. You're saying a completely planned economy is social democracy. No, I'm sorry. This is ridiculous. It's not the same thing. A state plan is not the same thing as a social democracy. That's ridiculous.
Okay, perhaps I'm being a bit hyperbolic. Hyperbolic there, but my point that I'm trying to hit on here is that because you're saying that because the profits themselves again go back into society, that makes it okay. But I would say that Marx and Engels would disagree with this quite heavily, because again, the fact that profits exist at all, you can derive so much from that. That means the capitalist mode of production was still in full effect. It was just the actual distribution of this surplus value was just different. But that's just a variation on capitalism.
It was made. The market determines that, and just because you can have a
but the market is just a symptom of capital. That it's not.
The Soviet Union was social democratic. I mean, this is nonsense. It's like taking a tiny aspect of something and saying, therefore, it's
okay. I'm not actually trying to say that USSR was just social democracy. Okay, I'm just.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, it's like, as I said, I was being hyperbolic. Like, calm down. So, like, my point though is, fuck. What was I gonna say? You interrupted me. Fuck. What was I saying just now? Ah, shit. Hold on.
It's still
no, I've lost it. Fuck.
Allegedly, it functioned in the same way, and I'm saying it didn't function in the same way. You're saying that the aspects of it was there, therefore it was still there.
Yeah. So it's just a alteration on the, not even an alteration. It's just a different version of the capitalist mode of production. Yeah, there you go. Okay, I've got it. So you're saying because there were no markets, so the markets themselves are just products of like history and what makes most sense, and just products of capital, but it's not the actual cause itself, right? It's just a different way of mediating exchange and surplus value production. Right, and these are the fundamental aspects of capitalism. No, they are it is very important in capitalism. It's what we've seen for the most of the existence of capitalism. But I'm saying that the market isn't necessary for capitalism to function, as we saw in the USSR.
Okay, now you're done. You just claimed that you don't need.
I'm done.
In order for capitalism to exist.
No, you don't. No, definitely not, because it's a mode of production, while the market is just a mode of distribution.
No, that's complete BS.
Hey, why's that?
You don't need a market to run socialism. That's basically a fundamental aspect of it.
It's not, though. So it's not at all, because again, the fundamental aspect of capitalism is the mode of production, but the market is a mode of exchange.
Ridiculous point.
Exchange? Distribution, rather.
I mean, this has gotten to a ridiculous point. You've just said that the market is not an important or a defining aspect of capitalism.
It's not.
Yeah,
no.
Kind of, it is.
No, the defining aspects of capital are its mode of production.
It kind of really is. And even then, the market was basically abolished under the revolutionary, not the revisionist era of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I'm aware. But that's not the point, because the features of capitalism are, you know, value, generalized commodity production, capital. All of these things still existed. Now, markets manifest naturally out of that through history, but obviously, you know, it's fair to say that the USSR wasn't some kind of like natural historical progression of capitalism.
It didn't exist in the same form, and you're saying that they were the same form.
They definitely were the same form, yeah.
That's,
Yeah, the only thing you're saying is different is that the mode of distribution was different, but that doesn't necessitate a different mode of production.
even production was different. It was by a plan, not by what was necessary.
No, because the plan is how things are distributed.
No. I mean, yeah, that can be it too. But they didn't say we're going to produce this amount of steel, and that's about distribution. No, that was the part of the state plan. Like I did a massive, like, friggin' 45-minute long video on that, particularly with regards as it relates to the Feldman model of economic planning.
Okay. But what I'm saying is that the mode of production had capital and value and commodities,
allocated
exchange, wage labor. Even we haven't even talked about wage labor. USSR totally had wage labor. Meaningless.
Yeah, it actually is meaningless. What's the alternative to wage labor?
Labor vouchers.
Labor vouchers. Absolutely wrong. I was actually really prepared for that one.
Oh.
In the poverty of philosophy vouchers, where Marx discussed it, they were traded by people and higher values were sold off. I mean, how do you know that this labor value is your value and not assigned to someone else? And if that's the case, a labor voucher is only an equivalent to something, and that would be an amount of labor done, right? That would be the point of a labor voucher.
Yeah.
So the same thing would be money.
No, not at all. Because, okay, so money circulates. Money is a form of a commodity. It's how commodities express themselves in other commodities. Labor and furthermore, money represents value. Well, labor vouchers, however, do not circulate. And furthermore, yes, they are representing an equivalent of social labor. No one denies this. However, value is objectified labor. The value under socialism represented with labor vouchers is not objectified because, again, there's no distinction between private and social labor.
You're literally just describing what a labor voucher is. You're just saying that because it gets...
I'm saying that's why there's no value involved.
Yeah, there is.
Well, no, I just told you why there isn't, though.
It's just labor value.
No, because I've just told you that value is objectified labor power.
Equivalent amount. It's the same thing.
No. Value does not directly... No, I have a direct Marx quote that I'm going to get up right now. Hold on. Where the fuck is it? Yeah, because this is just outright wrong. Give me a moment. I have to look it up online. But sorry, Marx outright says that, you know, abstract labor power is the substance of value, but it's not value itself.
Okay. And how does that make money different from a labor voucher?
Because labor vouchers represent social labor while money represents value.
That's in the social relations of it. I mean, that's even the same thing. Like, what do you buy with a labor voucher? X amount of labor vouchers for something. That's the same thing.
I'm sorry?
It's the same thing.
Well, it's not, though. I keep telling you why it's not.
And you buy something with a labor voucher. How many labor vouchers or how much of a labor voucher, depending on how it works, is what would be the equivalent to a purchasing price. It eventually just ends up acting just like money.
No, God, no. No, I don't know how more simple to put it, because again, money circulates.
How they both act the same.
But they don't act the same, because money circulates while labor vouchers don't, and again, money represents value, while value does not exist with labor vouchers.
So value doesn't exist with labor vouchers?
Yes.
Then why would anybody produce anything if the value doesn't exist? I mean, this is just
What?
a complete bullshit argument.
What? What argument is that? Sorry.
Nothing has value because they're labor. I'm sorry, that's complete bullshit.
Do you not know what value is? Like, it's not something that exists under communism. It's just...
Oh, so you're presupposing it not to exist under capitalism, even though...
No, it does exist. It does exist under capitalism.
Now it exists.
I'm sorry, what? What?
Sorry, this is complete bullshit.
Okay, so value exists under capitalism. Value does not exist under communism. That's a pretty basic point. I thought most people were familiar with.
Represents the same thing as cash.
What? No. Okay, so that's the.
If it's not an equivalent to an amount of labor done, then why don't people just get ration cards instead?
Well, they could. I mean, yeah, labor vouchers are just a name. They could be named something else as long as they're doing the same.
No, there's a big difference between a ration card and a labor voucher. There's a big difference.
Okay.
A voucher is an equivalent to amount of work done.
Yeah, no, yeah, you're right. Okay, so that's why then. That's why they don't, because the labor voucher is equivalent to the social labor. Well, they would be. Marx talks at this. Do you want me to just read Critique of the Gopher program to you? Because like this is very basic stuff. Well, clearly you haven't, because you're talking about how do you feed babies. Well, Marx talks about this, you know, specifically out of the labor done by labor vouchers. There are deductions made to cover those unable to work. No. Okay, so okay, you know what? Actually, there's a simpler way for this. Actually, I've just remembered. Capital Volume 2. Marx literally says word for word, they are not currency. They do not circulate. But you seem to be saying that they are currency and they work the same way.
The same as money. They just don't circulate.
Then they don't function the same as money.
In the Poverty of Philosophy, when he answers Proudhon about labor value.
And once again, there's this whole thing of value which you just can't seem to get your head around. And like this whole debate, I've been bringing up why value doesn't exist, but you almost seem to be ignoring it.
You're just saying that doesn't exist. Human labor creates value. You're just saying.
Yeah, you know, it's the substance. It's the substance of value.
Because they have labor vouchers, and labor vouchers don't represent value because it's communism. This is almost circular reasoning. Sorry, this was a massive waste of time. So this was, I mean, the 30 minutes is up. You nitpick definitions. It's basically your entire argument, and then just denied that labor vouchers end up acting the same way as cash does, even when the example of the Catalonia even had the similar problems. I'm sorry.
I don't care what Catalonia does. No, okay, so the reason I talked about definitions so much is because I'm trying to show that you don't actually think it was socialist according to Marx's own definitions. That's why definitions might be a bit important there, Jason. And furthermore, this isn't even something that
fit the definition you were given.
This isn't even something that other like Marxist-Leninists even think. Like this is like something uniquely dumb to you that I've never seen anywhere else.
Same thing as under capitalism. It does not function the same way. It does not work the same way. It is not the same thing.
Here I found the quote. There we go. Okay, so in Capital, Marx says human labor power in motion or human labor creates value, but is not itself value. It becomes value only in its congealed state when embodied in some form or object. So you see what I'm trying to get at? Yes.
So things aren't produced with labor vouchers?
I'm so. What? No.
Embodied in the things that are produced, which would be the commodities or whatever the title you want.
Yeah, they become embodied when they make the transition from private to social labor.
You literally just agreed with me.
No, because okay, so I am agreeing with you there, but with labor vouchers there is no transition from private social labor, so there's still human labor power imbued into the objects, giving them, you know, use value.
Manifestations of it, and they still
there's still abstract labor power into socialism, totally, but like there's still.
What happened with money would still happen with labor vouchers, not exactly the same, but many of the same problems would still exist, and they would still function the same way. And even
how exactly did they function the same way again? Because again, you keep saying this, but it doesn't make any sense. So like labor vouchers only become value when they're objectified, and this occurs through the exchange of products.
People can still hoard them.
So
as was the problem that some labor vouchers were worth more than others because of the difficulty of working people were exchanging that outside of the sphere of production. You know, how do people still hoard them, which caused a problem. It still remains relatively the same problem. Labor vouchers really aren't going. I'm not for or against labor vouchers, really. But there's still essentially the same problems arise.
Well, you seem to be now coming at it from, again, this kind of practical solution type thing. But as I already explained, Marx never tried to talk about them as some kind of practical solution. He just said, now I totally accept that they're like an imitation of money. I'm not saying that, but to say they function the same way as money is just, again, so ridiculous that I honestly don't even know what to say to it. But like, so
It has the same character.
no, it doesn't. The only reason it exists is because, again, it would make sense to people to use after coming from a capitalist economy to a socialist one. That's fine. But it's different from money because, again, what they're actually representing is just social labor. But this social labor hasn't become value because value no longer becomes embodied in objects because it no longer needs to.
Then you're producing nothing of any value.
No, you're not producing value. No, that's exactly right. That is exactly right.
The actual experience of using labor vouchers goes against what you're saying.
I'm sorry?
The experience of labor vouchers being used goes against what you're saying.
Well, could you elaborate?
Yeah, because they still end up having many of the same problems that money did, actually, anarchist Spain.
Okay, but now we're talking about hoarding and stuff, but that's not relevant to what I'm talking about. I'm talking about them not representing value like under capitalism.
So value doesn't exist in commodities because value no longer exists because social labor, even though it essentially functions the same way. I mean, this whole debate was a waste of time. I mean, all you did was definition monger. It's ridiculous. You're going to sit there and say a country that was doing socialism is wrong because it doesn't go support your definition or your
Marx's definition. Look, if you want to like come up with your own definitions, that's fine, but you have to accept that then you're not a Marxist.
It's not my definition. It's not my definition.
Okay, whoever's definition, but it isn't Marx's. So if you want to say like you're not a Marxist, that's fine. That's okay.
This was a waste of time. You're just going to keep arguing nitpicking definitions.
It's not nitpicking. Just because you say it's nitpicking doesn't make it nitpicking.
It is nitpicking. You're nitpicking the definitions rather than trying to look at the...
No, I think giving the definition of capital, for instance, or the definition of value...
You're nitpicking them.
No, I'm just giving them.
Actually, look at the manifestations of them. It's different. Capital under socialism isn't the same thing as under capitalism.
Well, then I would say that's not a manifestation of social. You're saying that you can throw. You know what you're saying?
Absolutely full of shit.
Whoa, do you want to calm down, Jason?
Nonsense.
Let's all calm down here.
I fucking knew this was going to be a waste of time.
Okay, Jason. Okay, Jason. Why don't you just let me make this one point? Okay. You seem to be almost implying that you can throw these definitions out the window because of the actual...
Throw the definition.
Hey, Jason.
I'm saying they're not the
It's okay, Jason.
thing as you are trying to define them as.
All right. Do you want to let me finish my point? Or
Go ahead.
all right. So, from what I can understand, it almost implies that you're saying that we can forget these definitions when the actual practical experiences of these... socialist revolutions take place because they're just kind of what socialism meant. Sorry?
False. That is not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that their manifestations were not what Marx described as being this.
Is that's what I'm trying to say. That's what I'm trying to say. So maybe I'm not saying it in the right way, but I think we're...
Doing nut job is not the same thing as a gun in the hands of the military.
Okay.
Sorry. A gun is a gun, but they're not being used the same way.
I'm aware.
In fact, I'm sorry. You're absolutely wrong. You're just...
I was never talking about guns, but
I didn't say you were. It was an example.
Yeah, so my point is that for me it almost implies with this logic that anything
doesn't function in the same way, it's still the same thing. Okay, you know what? Done.
I'm almost it almost implies to me that you can
I am not,
okay, I haven't been able to get this point out for the last 5 minutes, so I don't think you're up for any debate anymore.
You're just starting to lie at this point.
Lie? What am I lying about? What am I lying about?
You're lying about what I'm saying.
Sorry, I allowed you to clarify, didn't I? Sorry if I got it wrong. That's an honest mistake. That's not a lie.
Just because something manifests itself in a different way doesn't mean it's the same thing. Capital under socialism is not the same thing as capital under capitalism.
Well, we've already gone through that. I'd quite like to make this one point,
if you
but
think they're the same thing, you're full of shit. You're wrong. You're absolutely wrong.
And that is your final argument.
Producing commodities in socialism is not the same thing as producing commodities in capitalism. It just absolutely is not. And the question is over exchange value and then things being...
That very statement, though, is oxymoronic because there's no commodities under socialism. But
okay,
Jason, you're getting very angry here.
Intellectual garbage.
Hello? Jason? Oh, he's gone. Okay. Well, that's a shame.